Good morning to everybody. What is R&D in the arts? And I think all three of us are agreeing that the answer to that question is in the process of making. I don't think there's a theoretical answer to it. I think there's an emergent answer. And the emergent answer comes from the collective practice of people doing this sort of stuff. The R&D fund has funded around 65 different projects, which are impressive in their variety. As colleagues have remarked, some will thrive, some will not, but that's just the nature of stuff. But I just wondered, reading through this impressive list, if you could capture any emergent categories from them, which might define the horizons for what R&D is in the arts in the modern age. And I came up with 6. I'm sure other people can come up with fewer or more, but they struck me as these. One thread is around increasing access, which is attending to the particular needs of people who are partially sighted or have learning disabilities or things of that kind. So trying to customize the experience of the arts for particular needs is one thread. And also how to engage people who are non-participants in trying to develop their sense of belonging to the arts. So that's one thread. The second is a thread around audiences, which is very prominent in these schemes, around audience building, partly to do with the things I've just been talking about, but also to do with providing information about events and improving ticketing and so on. There's also a strand around investigating audiences, about learning about their preferences and their behaviours, and therefore trying to be more responsive in provision. And also, there's a great valuing of community and place, and a consciousness that the arts only exist insofar as they have an audience which is particular in its needs and interests. And then engaging these audiences, engaging them in interactive performances, in crowdsourcing information around curation for museums and so on, and also in the prosumer world, where people participate in the development of art events of one kind or another. There's a thread again, this is the third one, around widening and enhancing the experience of the arts, about providing supplementary information, about communicating passion, enthusiasm and knowledge, and that is a point of entry, I think, particularly for research, though not exclusively so. And then fourthly is interest in analytics, how we can, using digital technologies, gather more information about audiences, understanding what succeeds and what doesn't succeed, about ticketing, marketing, promotion, and also around data sharing. That seems to me quite an important emergent area. Fourth, around using technologies to break existing genres, to look at comics, for instance, in the digital age, or graphic narratives, or narratives developed communally rather than from single points of origin. About how you constitute collections in museums or galleries around individual preferences or using user-generated enthusiasms. And then finally, new products and new services. There's a lot of energy around that kind of thing. Services in terms of ticketing and marketing, as I've said earlier on, but also new approaches to finance, about crowdsourcing finance, about gathering together clubs for distribution and raising funding and so on, and different ways in which music might be conveyed. So it's a very rich, fabulously rich group of projects, those 60-odd of them up and down the UK. Here's just to close a few reflections of a general kind about these. It seems to me there are two evolving trends in research which are present here. One is that research is collaborative, as Alan said earlier on, and that's one of the driving energies of this project, I think. But also that research needs to become increasingly occur in real time. It's something which it's changing the nature of the researcher and the object of knowledge in ways which are subtle and barely understood, I think, but which nonetheless are extremely interesting. I am interested in the way that new forms of research come and go, why they thrive, why they emerge, why they develop. And there is, I think, at the moment, an extraordinarily febrile, full of potential moment to try and define a very real new field in this area. And it's happening through practice, not through prescription. There are, however, I think, issues around this. One is the incommensurate pace between research, arts practitioners, and creative businesses. They move at different timescales, different velocities, and a lot of that is to do with the fact that they're geared towards producing different objects at the end of it. There is a world of a difference between a new product and an academic article, for instance, and we need to work harder on trying to bring those things together. And then there are differences, I think, around organisational practice. Researchers tend to belong to universities, and to their discredit, universities are not very responsive in relation to the needs of SMEs and quick-fire, emergent, contemporary things. They're slow to develop contracts, they're over-fussy about IP, they don't pay their bills on time, they're more used to dealing with the big corporates, or they aspire to deal with the big corporates, rather than the small business. And this, again, is a long attritional thing which we're going to have to develop, but there is a real need to try and up the game on that.